Norse Mythology, The History of the Norse Pantheon and the Most Famous Myths, written by Andrew Scott and Charles River editors, narrated by Mary Rossman. Introduction. Much of what is known of the Norse myths comes from the 10th century and onwards. Until this time, and indeed for centuries afterwards, Norse culture, particularly that of Iceland, where the myths were eventually transcribed, was an oral culture. In fact, in all Scandinavian countries well into the 13th century, laws were memorized by officials known as Lawspeakers, who recited them at the Thing. The Thing was the legislative assembly in Scandinavia, held for judicial purposes. One of the most famous of these Lawspeakers was the Icelander Snorri Sturluson, a masterful writer who wrote the Prose Edda in the 13th century. There are other sources for the Norse myths, namely the later Poetic Edda, a collection of poems and prose work and other sagas, but the Snorri's prose. Edda is the most complete work whose attribution is known to modern scholars. The Prose Edda is a collection of Norse myths split into 3 sections: the Gylfaginning, the deluding of Gylfi, the Skaldskaparmal, the language of poetry, and the Hatatal, the enumeration of meters. The first has a frame story that entails a Swedish king, Gylfi, disguising himself as an old man Gangleri when he journeys to Asgard to meet the gods. When he arrives, he meets 3 men, High One, just as high and third, who reveal to him stories of the world and the gods. The second section contains a warning for Christians not to believe in the Norse gods, specifically the 2 families, the Aesir and the Vanir, but also refutes the notion that they were demons, which was a common supposition among some Christians at the time. The Prose Edda begins in this line of thought with a euhemeristic prologue, which traces the history of the Norse gods as human heroes of Troy, making Thor one of King Priam's sons. The Norse myths also appear to follow a chronological narrative, which the historian John Lindow describes as having a mythical past, present, and future, and it is believed that Snorri, a Christian, recorded these pagan beliefs to preserve and explain the stylistic poetry of Iceland, particularly the popular descriptive devices known as kennings. A kenning is made up of a base word and a modifying word that is used to describe a separate object. For example, gold had a great many kennings, one of which was Sif's hair. If, however, the memory of Loki cutting off Sif's hair and replacing it with gold were lost, then this kenning would make no sense to later readers. There are many of these allusions to the myths, and it is thanks to them that the myths have survived. Thanks to recent Hollywood depictions of the Norse gods, they are more popular than ever before. For example, despite the virtual disappearance of the indigenous Norse religion and mythology several centuries.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?